Ready? Time to uncover the truth. Nipsey Hussle. On March 31st, 2019, Ermias Asghedom was shot outside his own clothing store on Slauson Avenue in Los Angeles. The world grieved loudly and immediately. Vigils filled the streets of Crenshaw. Tributes poured in from presidents and rappers alike. But underneath the noise of mourning, a quieter story was already being buried, one his doctors had been tracking for years before that afternoon. Nipsey Hussle was not simply a recording artist. By the final years of his life, he had become an active investigator of suppressed medical knowledge, specifically the work of the herbalist Dr. Sebi, who had claimed to cure diseases the pharmaceutical industry considered incurable. Dr. Sebi himself died in 2016 under circumstances his family publicly described as suspicious. Nipsey had been financing and producing a full documentary exploring those claims at the time of his own death. What the public never heard was that Nipsey had been privately managing a serious cardiac condition in the years before he was killed. His family confirmed health struggles in brief, carefully worded statements that were never followed up by mainstream entertainment media. His inner circle has described consultations with specialists in the months immediately preceding his murder, details that were absorbed into the grief of his violent death and never examined independently. The documentary footage he had gathered, interviews, records, and evidence compiled over years has never been publicly released. No accounting of that archive has ever been made. The intersection here is not comfortable. A man investigating the suppression of medical treatments was himself navigating a private medical reality that the public was never given access to. Whether those two facts are connected or simply parallel is a question nobody with authority has been willing to answer. His estate settled several medical-adjacent legal matters in the years following his death, quietly and without press. Some silences are not accidental. They are architectural, constructed carefully by the people with the most to lose from the noise. Nipsey Hussle's medical story did not die with him. It simply never got to begin. Selena Quintanilla. She was 23 years old and standing at the absolute peak of everything she had built. In the spring of 1995, Selena Quintanilla Perez was the best-selling Latin artist in North American history, preparing for a crossover English-language album that her label believed would make her the biggest name in popular music. On April 19th of that year, she checked into a Days Inn in Corpus Christi, Texas, to confront her fan club president about stolen money. She never walked back out. The story the world received was a story of violence, betrayal, and loss. It was all of those things. But the narrative closure that came with Yolanda Saldivar's arrest and conviction performed a secondary function that nobody named at the time. It ended the medical conversation before it had a chance to start. In the months leading up to her death, people close to Selena had been observing something that tour fatigue alone could not fully explain. Selena had been describing her exhaustion in terms that those around her found unusual. Not the tiredness of a packed touring schedule, but something deeper and less responsive to rest. Her physicians documented irregularities during consultations in early 1995, irregularities that her team attributed publicly to overwork and stress. Her medical records from that period remain partially restricted. The official cause of death, a single gunshot wound, closed the file on everything her body had been signaling in the preceding months, because once a violent cause of death is established, the medical record before it becomes legally and narratively irrelevant. Her posthumous album, Dreaming of You, was released in July of 1995 and debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. The industry moved forward. The medical questions that existed before April 19th were never asked in any public forum. Her doctors gave no statements, her label gave no statements. The story of her final months was rewritten entirely as a story about a killer, not about a body that may have been telling a different story first. When a star dies violently, the violence becomes the only sentence anyone reads. Everything before the period disappears. Luke Perry. On February 27, 2019, Luke Perry collapsed at his home in Sherman Oaks, California. 5 days later, on March 4th, he was gone. The cause was listed as a massive ischemic stroke. He was 52 years old. The headline wrote itself as tragedy, as shock, as the cruel randomness of a life cut short. What the headline did not write was the medical history that almost certainly preceded it. A massive ischemic stroke at 52 is not simply bad luck. The American Stroke Association classifies strokes in patients under 55 as early onset events, a designation that by definition triggers investigation into underlying cardiovascular pathology, These are not strokes that arrive without warning in otherwise healthy systems. They build, they signal. They leave evidence in prior consultations, in test results, in the kind of private medical management that high-profile figures in the entertainment industry are especially motivated to keep out of public record. Perry had been public about health awareness in a specific way. In 2015, he underwent a colonoscopy and became an outspoken advocate for early screening, a level of medical engagement that suggested a man actively navigating his own health picture with some seriousness. People who worked alongside him on Riverdale in the months before his collapse described him as fatigued in a way that stood out even on a demanding production schedule. His coworkers noted he had seemed off. Production on a major story arc was quietly restructured in the week following his death without public explanation. According to people close to Perry, he had been consulting with cardiovascular specialists as far back as 2017, visits that generated no press and left no public record. The medical community issued no statements about what caused a 52-year-old man in the public eye to suffer a stroke of that severity without any prior public health disclosure. His representatives did not address it. The story remained what it had been from the first headline: sudden, inexplicable, tragic. What were the warning signs that never made the press release? They existed. They were documented somewhere. And the infrastructure of celebrity privacy ensured they stayed exactly where they were. Patrick Swayze. In January of 2008, Patrick Swayze's publicist confirmed what the tabloids had been circling for months. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The announcement landed as breaking news across every entertainment outlet in the world. But the timeline buried inside that announcement was the real story, because the diagnosis had not begun in 2008. According to his wife Lisa Niemi's own account, the medical reality had been present and managed in private for considerably longer than the press release suggested. Pancreatic cancer carries one of the lowest survival rates of any known malignancy. Approximately 10% of patients survive 5 years past diagnosis, and that figure drops sharply for stage 4 presentations. By the time a pancreatic cancer diagnosis reaches stage 4, it has almost always been developing in the body for a significant period. The window for treatment that changes outcomes is earlier, sometimes much earlier, which makes the question of when Swayze's team first knew critically important. His oncologist, Dr. George Fisher at Stanford University Medical Center, confirmed in public statements that the diagnosis had been made in late 2007. But inconsistencies in the surrounding timeline were noted by medical journalists and quickly absorbed into the broader narrative of his courage and fight. Swayze continued filming the A&E series The Beast throughout his treatment, a fact his production team initially denied before confirming under pressure. His visible weight loss during public appearances had been attributed consistently to fitness and diet changes. Lisa Niemi's 2012 memoir, Worth Fighting For, contains passages that strongly imply the couple had been managing the diagnosis privately for a period that the official public timeline does not account for. That discrepancy received brief attention from medical journalism circles before disappearing. The machinery of Hollywood reputation management is extraordinarily well calibrated. It does not lie, precisely. It selects. It chooses the moment of disclosure that causes the least disruption to the commercial apparatus around a name. By the time the world was told Patrick Swayze was dying, the window for a different story had already closed. Robin Williams. On August 11th, 2014, Robin Williams was found dead at his home in Paradise Cay, California. The world was given a story about depression, about a beloved man overwhelmed by darkness. It was a story told with genuine grief, and it was not wrong, but it was profoundly incomplete. His wife, Susan Schneider Williams, spent the months after his death fighting to replace that incomplete story with the clinical truth. And the clinical truth was far more disturbing than depression. Robin Williams was dying of diffuse Lewy body dementia, one of the most aggressive and least understood neurodegenerative diseases known to medical science. His neurologist, Dr. Bruce Miller at the University of California San Francisco Memory and Aging Center, later described Williams's brain pathology as among the most severe cases of Lewy body disease he had encountered in decades of practice. The disease had spread through his brain in ways that had not been identified because Lewy body dementia is misdiagnosed in up to 80% of cases, typically appearing first as Parkinson's disease, depression, or generalized psychiatric deterioration. That is exactly what happened. Williams had been formally diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2014, a diagnosis his physicians treated with medications appropriate for Parkinson's, some of which may have accelerated certain Lewy body symptoms rather than alleviating them. He experienced visual hallucinations, paranoia, and severe cognitive disintegration in his final year, all publicly attributed to stress and the natural progression of Parkinson's. The possibility that incorrect medication contributed to his mental state in his final weeks has been raised by independent neurologists and carefully avoided by his clinical team. Susan Schneider-Williams published a paper in the journal Neurology in 2016 explicitly to reform how Lewy body dementia is identified and treated, calling the system's failure a tragedy within a tragedy. What does it mean when the system tasked with saving him did not know what it was fighting? It means the most brilliant comedic mind of a generation spent his last year being treated for a disease he did not have, while the disease he did have went unnamed until the autopsy. Prince. On April 21, 2016, Prince Rogers Nelson was found unresponsive in an elevator at Paisley Park, his compound outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was 57 years old. The Midwest Medical Examiner confirmed the cause of death as an accidental fentanyl overdose, specifically from counterfeit pills containing pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl that had been obtained entirely outside any formal medical system. That detail is the center of everything. Prince had been managing a severe and degenerative hip condition for years, reportedly the result of decades of performing in the high heels on a hard stage surfaces, a physical toll that his team had concealed entirely from public record. The pain was real, documented by those around him, and treated through a supply chain that bypassed standard pharmacy records and operated without any formal prescribing physician, according to the 2018 investigation by the Midwest Medical Examiner's Office. This was not recreational drug use, it was pain management that had moved completely outside any medical accountability. 6 days before his death, his private plane made an emergency landing in Moline, Illinois, after he was found unresponsive on board. His representatives described the incident publicly as a bad case of the flu. On April 20th, the night before he died, members of addiction specialist Dr. Howard Kornfeld's team traveled to Paisley Park specifically to address concerns about his dependency. The intervention came 24 hours too late. Counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl were found throughout the compound. No licensed physician could be identified as the source of the specific pills that killed him. Several people close to Prince have stated that he had been warned explicitly by at least one physician that his hip required surgery and that he refused, reportedly because surgical intervention conflicted with his religious convictions as a Jehovah's Witness. That refusal, quiet and private and deeply personal, was the hinge point on which everything else turned. Heath Ledger. On January 22, 2008, Heath Ledger was found unresponsive in his Manhattan apartment by his masseuse. He was 28 years old. The New York City Medical Examiner confirmed the cause of death as acute intoxication from a combination of 6 prescription medications: oxycodone, hydrocodone, diazepam, temazepam, alprazolam, and doxylamine, a mixture of opioids, benzodiazepines, and antihistamines. Not one of those drugs was obtained illegally. Every single one came from a licensed physician operating within the legal boundaries of the American medical system. That is the most important sentence in this story. Heath Ledger did not die from illegal drugs. He died from the legal system doing exactly what it was designed to do, in a culture that treats the symptoms of performance without treating the source. He had been suffering from severe insomnia and acute anxiety during and after his preparation for the Joker in The Dark Knight, a role he completed filming approximately 6 months before his death. Colleagues on the production later described him speaking about an inability to disengage from the character, describing a mental state he called not being able to get the Joker out. No formal psychiatric intervention was ever initiated by the production or its medical resources. The specific mechanism of his death has a clinical name: polypharmacy fragmentation. Multiple physicians, each operating independently, each prescribing a medication that was individually appropriate, with no coordination between them and no single physician holding oversight of the complete picture. The combination became lethal precisely because no one person was responsible for the combination. His father, Kim Ledger, gave a public statement that placed explicit blame on the healthcare system's failure to coordinate his son's prescriptions, a statement that generated one news cycle and then disappeared. His masseuse, upon finding him unresponsive, called Mary-Kate Olsen twice before calling 911. A detail that implied awareness of a private network of medical management operating around him that has never been fully examined. Chadwick Boseman. On August 28, 2020, the internet stopped. Chadwick Boseman had died at home, surrounded by his family after a private battle with colon cancer. The announcement was made without warning, without prior disclosure, without a single press statement in the preceding 4 years that had so much as hinted at what was happening. He had been playing kings and warriors and legends on the largest screens in the world. He had been doing it while dying. The diagnosis came in 2016, the same year he appeared in Captain America: Civil War, establishing himself as the Black Panther for the first time. It was stage 3 colon cancer. Over the following 4 years, as the disease progressed to stage 4, he filmed Black Panther, Avengers, Infinity War, Avengers, Endgame, Daw 5 Bloods, and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. He underwent chemotherapy. He underwent surgical procedures. He appeared on red carpets, gave press junkets, and carried an entire cultural movement on his shoulders. And the entire apparatus of the most commercially powerful film franchise in history ensured that nobody knew. His visible weight loss appeared in paparazzi photographs over several years. His publicists attributed it consistently to fitness preparation and method acting demands. Not a single statement from Disney, from Marvel Studios, from any production entity connected to his work acknowledged anything unusual. His family's announcement after his death used a specific phrase. He had battled the disease from diagnosis to death. That phrasing was not accidental. It was a quiet indictment of 4 years of institutional silence. Co-stars including Lupita Nyong'o and director Ryan Coogler have said in retrospect that they saw signs, the fatigue, the physical change, the pain he carried between takes, and attributed all of it to professional intensity, because that was the only explanation they were given. Paul Walker. On November 30th, 2013, Paul Walker died when the Porsche Carrera GTI he was riding in struck a concrete lamppost and burst into flames in Valencia, California. He was 40 years old. The Los Angeles County Coroner's report listed traumatic and thermal injuries as the cause of death, and in doing so, it performed a function that goes largely unexamined. It closed the medical file. Permanently, violently, and without anyone noticing that something else may have already been written inside it. For action film leads at Walker's level of commercial profile, comprehensive medical physicals are not optional, they are contractual. Insurance requirements for performers on major studio productions mandate evaluations thorough enough to document cardiovascular function, neurological baselines, and systemic health in significant detail. Walker had undergone exactly such a physical for insurance purposes in mid-2013 as part of standard production requirements. The full findings of that examination were never disclosed and remain protected under confidentiality agreements standard to the entertainment industry. Several people close to Walker during the final years of his life described episodes of irregular heartbeat and unexplained fatigue that he attributed to the physical demands of his diving and racing activities. This pattern of symptoms in extreme athletes has a recognized clinical profile, sometimes called the athlete's paradox, where years of high cardiovascular stress produce structural adaptations that can mask developing pathology. Walker was a certified rescue diver, an amateur racing driver, and a man who had spent 20 years subjecting his cardiovascular system to the kind of stress that can produce misleading results on standard screenings. The driver, Roger Raudas, had no reported medical history that contributed to the crash. The mechanical failure of the vehicle appears to have been the proximate cause, but Walker's own baseline health status, what his 2013 physical found and what his doctors knew in the months before November, has never entered the public record. The crash was loud enough to end every other conversation. Michael Jackson. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. The world stopped in a way it had perhaps never stopped for a single human being. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, had been administering propofol, a surgical anesthetic used exclusively in clinical settings with full resuscitation equipment on standby, as a nightly sleep aid in Jackson's bedroom at his rented Holmby Hills estate. This was not a gray area in medical ethics. It was not an experimental practice or a disputed protocol. It was categorically outside any standard of medical care that exists anywhere in the world, and it had been happening every night for approximately 2 months, but propofol was only the final chapter. The medical history that preceded it, the decades of suppressed diagnoses, undisclosed conditions, and private treatments hidden behind the machinery of the most powerful celebrity management infrastructure ever assembled, is the story that never fully reached the public. Jackson had been managing lupus erythematosus for years, a serious autoimmune disease that his team publicly denied while privately treating. His autopsy confirmed the diagnosis. It also confirmed severe vitiligo, which Jackson had always publicly attributed as the sole explanation for his skin's changed appearance, while the lupus component, which can itself cause significant dermatological and systemic effects, was never disclosed during his lifetime. His autopsy revealed a body weight of approximately 136 pounds on a frame of 5 feet 9 inches. It revealed scarring consistent with multiple surgical procedures that had never been publicly disclosed. It revealed severe dehydration and physical deterioration consistent with someone who had been in serious systemic decline. He was rehearsing for 50 sold-out shows at the O2 Arena in London under a contract with AEG Live. Internal emails produced during the subsequent wrongful death lawsuit, a case ultimately decided in AEG's favor in 2013, showed executives explicitly discussing Jackson's physical deterioration months before his death, describing concerns about whether he could physically complete the tour. The tour was announced anyway. The medical clearance was issued anyway. Dr. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 2011 and sentenced to 4 years. What connects every name on this list is not the disease. The diseases are different, the timelines are different, the details are different. What connects them is the architecture, the specific, deliberate, financially motivated architecture of silence that surrounds celebrity health in the entertainment industry. These were not private people navigating private struggles. They were public institutions, billion-dollar commercial assets, whose medical realities were managed the same way their press releases were managed, with precision, with strategic timing, and with the fundamental assumption that the public's knowledge of what was happening inside these bodies was a liability to be controlled rather than a truth to be told. Robin Williams was treated for the wrong disease. Heath Ledger was treated by too many doctors who never spoke to each other. Chadwick Boseman built a cultural monument while a stage 4 diagnosis went unannounced for 4 years. Michael Jackson was administered a surgical anesthetic as a sleep aid while his management team discussed his deterioration in internal emails. The pattern is not coincidence. It is the cost of an industry that treats human beings as products. And the people on this list paid that cost personally, while the institutions that managed them did not pay it at all. If this video made you see these names differently, that is the beginning of something. Hit subscribe and leave the name in the comments that hit you hardest. The floor is yours. Every one of these stories was hiding in plain sight. The diagnosis was always there. The silence was just louder. Subscribe because the questions nobody is asking are the only ones worth asking.